Hello and welcome. My name's Grahame Rees and I'm here with Daniel Griffiths. And today we're talking about his book, Wild Like Flowers. Daniel resides in Virginia in the USA, and that's about all I know about him. So it's just like we've just met up at a coffee shop, and we're going to learn all about Daniel. We're going to learn about what drives him to be interested in writing a book like this, and then we're going to talk about the book. So welcome, Daniel. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you live.
Hey, thanks, Graham. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm excited that our first meeting is on a recorded Zoom call. So this is definitely a different way of doing things, and I'm really excited for it. So thanks for having me on and featuring the book. Yeah, so a little story on me. I recently did a podcast episode all about my story, and it was like an hour and a half long, and it was cut off even then. So I have quite the medical backstory that really formed my pathway to regenerative ag farming in general. No need to get into it. I'll just kind of give you high-level glimpses of really important notes, and especially how they relate to the book. And I'll just usher the conversation that way. So to set some context, my wife and I, we farm, or I should say we own a farm together. It's definitely a two-person job. She's the powerhouse. I'm just kind of the brawn, is how we like to talk about it. But we farm land, family land here in Central Virginia. It's called Timshel Wildland. Timshel Wildland, it's a 400-acre process-led regenerative and emergent conservation landscape that we believe nurtures ecosystem regeneration, increased carbon sequestration, nourishing foods, biodiversity, and species habitat for both the wild and the human community all around us. If there's anything if there's anything that's going to undergird this entire conversation, the foundation of everything that we do, and really what the book is about when we get to that portion of this little coffee house chat, it is that. When we're focused on farming, we're focused on the human community in as much as we're focused on the wild community, so the non-domesticated wildlife all around us. And wildlife could be pasture species that aren't necessarily cultivated in the eastern United States for cattle foraging reasons, all the way through deer and mountain lions and black bear and things like that. The wildland, Timshel Wildland, we believe that we are the co-pilot in the vehicle of resilient regeneration. And all we do is help the drivers of ecosystem succession, of ecosystem function, if you will, of life all around us, from carrots to cows to crownbeard, it's the native weed here, do what they do best, right? That's drive the car. All we do is sit in the passenger seat with a roadmap, right? Symbiosis, the director of symphonies, using whatever analogy you like best. But the wildland in our work and in our story, even, which I'm getting to, it's really understanding this paradigm shift. You have many different flavors of regenerative agriculture all across the world, right? Go to Amazon, find all the regenerative ag books there are, and everybody from Nourishment, Fred Provenza, to Gabe Brown's Dirt to Soil, they're talking about the same system, right? The same natural world that we all work in, but from different angles. And so our angle is a different version of that same thing, a different flavor of the regenerative movement, taking humans, right, as the drivers of succession the co-pilots of succession, not the drivers of ecosystem succession. It's a shift to becoming truly native to your place. We always say to harvest, we have to first become, right? And so we have to truly understand the native ecology. We have to become the native ecology. And at that point, once the community is built, once the relationships are constructed and there's reciprocal relationships that are existent there, then the harvest is the byproduct of that relationship. I always like to say this, and I promise I'll get into my story. The Ojibwe, which called themselves the Anishinaabe, they're from like the central North Dakota, up into Canada region of the United States. They have a song, it's really a poem, and The buffalo, they stand in a circle, we join with them. Say that again. The buffalo, they stand in a circle, we join with them. And that poem, that song, it really does illustrate the way that we come to the regenerative movement, into farming, into rewilding, if you will, in order to hunt, right? In order to actually utilize the meat of the buffalo, the nourishment, that relationship, we first have to join with them. We have to join in their circle. And so that's what Timshel Wildland in the book is all about. Well, anyways, our story. So how did we end up here? If you would have asked me 10 years ago, I never would have said farming. You know, Daniel, what do you want to do with your life? Or where's your life going? I actually thought it was going into the world of high technology and entrepreneurship. I was in college at the time studying mathematics and computer science. I was applying for high tech computer science, software development sort of IT jobs in California and in Boston and in Austin, Texas. And my life changed. I was diagnosed with multiple, call them debilitating genetic diseases, or life-altering or life-threatening genetic diseases. And my life was put on halt. We stopped everything we were doing. I dropped out of college. My mom and I literally drove around the country for multiple years, from doctor's office to doctor's office. We went through surgeries, tests, procedures. There was even procedures where, you know, my entire hips were rebuilt and my shoulders were rebuilt. The issue was there was degeneration happening all over my body, from my organs to my bones, that were causing significant ramification type issues. You know, so for instance, my hip bones were degenerating, and so my actual movement, all the muscles and the lymphatic system that operate around that same hip region were also degenerating. And so we went through a period of about 2 or 3 years where, I mean, I just lived in hospitals, lived in operating tables. I remember there was this moment, this one day that I'll never forget. I was laying on this operating table, and there must have been 10 doctors, you know, in these full suits all around me, in these lights. And they were sticking these big needles into all parts of my body, not like you know, those wonderful acupuncture, thin micro needles. These things were very large and very painful. And they were sticking dyes into my body underneath these x-rays and scanning type machines to understand how these dyes were being pulled through my systems. And just, it was this massive diagnostic procedure. And I remember I was holding the hand of this one nurse, and I was just crying. It was one of the more painful things I've ever experienced. And she said, she looked at me and she said, "This too shall pass." And I'll never forget it. I couldn't tell you what she looked like. She was fully, you know, in the whole garb, hair pulled back, masks, glasses, you know, I mean, but her voice was feminine, and I'll never forget her saying, you know, "This too shall pass." Fast forward a couple years, and it did pass, but not in the way that we ever thought. I played football in college. I was a highly regarded Division I recruit. I weighed 240 pounds, could bench 225 pounds 19, 20 times. Very active, very strong individual. Fast forward till after all of this, I weighed about 135, 140 pounds soaking wet. And so, I mean, I was minuscule. I usually like to tell folks that at this point in my health journey, I weighed less than what I wrestled in 6th grade. And in 6th grade, I cut about 20 pounds to wrestle at that weight. And so I was a 6th grade skinny version, right, of a 20-some-year-old, once, you know, very athletic individual. And it was this weird shift. And I mean, weird is too bland of a word. It was a very painful shift in my life where, you know, I was bedridden. I weighed nothing. I would go through periods of a month or two where my body would degenerate, and I would lose, you know, 50, 60, 70 pounds in that span, about a month or 2 months. Just it was crazy episodes. And, you know, I was laying in bed watching the Super Bowl, and one of my good friends was the defensive back. He was a cornerback for the Eagles, Philadelphia Eagles at the time. And it was this weird contrast where we played football together. He's winning Super Bowls. I'm bedridden and I weigh nothing. And it was this, you know, it was the bottom of the road, right? It was the bottom of the barrel. Use whatever analogy makes sense or you like there, but I was at the very bottom, and it was very humbling. And I was quite depressed. Looking back, I was deeply depressed. Well, anyways, spring came, And I was sitting on the back porch of my family's home. This time I was married to my wife, Morgan, who farms with me now. She was at work, working full time. I more or less just vegetated on the back porch. Spring was coming, and I was excited. We grew up in Northeast Ohio, and so Northeast Ohio springs are always marvelous after the hard winter, where you get lake effect snow from, the Great Lakes region of North America. Spring comes and it's marvelous, just like all northern climates. Spring is the most wonderful time where you finally get to go outside and not freeze to death. And I was sitting out there reading a book, and I was actually reading Folk This Ain't Normal by Joel Salatin. And I had a little fire in this little chimenea. And I was just reading it. A friend gave it to me. Just happenstance, pure coincidence. A friend had given me the book, and I was reading it. And my mom walked out of the back sliding glass door onto the back patio, and she had a tear in her eye. I'll never forget, but she had a little smile, a smirk in her face, in her mouth. And she looked at me and she said, "Daniel, we've tried everything. We've literally toured around the country for many years, tests, surgeries, procedures. I mean, I've had legs and limbs taken off and rebuilt. And I mean, we did everything." And she says, "Daniel, we've done everything, but there's one thing we haven't done." And then the tear kind of dried up, kind of just went its way, and the smirk got bigger. And she said, "The only thing we haven't done is gotten chickens." And I laughed. And at this time I look back and I think to myself, what a world we live in, right? That that was the next step. But it was pain and joy and grief all kind of mixed in, with the idea of raising chickens. And so without asking my wife, who, like I said, was at work, my mom and I went online to a breeder, chicken breeder, Murray McMurray Hatchery. A lot of people use them here in the eastern side of the United States. And we bought 100 black Australorp chickens. We thought they were dual purpose birds. We knew nothing about it. We didn't know how to raise chickens. The only book I've ever picked up that was about agriculture was the one currently in my hand, Folk This Ain't Normal by Joel Salatin, which has very little to do about raising chickens. And we jumped in very heavy. My mom and my wife really is, the individuals who did the farming. I was too weak, but as my life shifted to be more agricultural, more connected to place, more interested in the foods that, I was putting into my body, health returned. And over a period of time, we started to see more health and more health and more health and sustained weight gain, right? I mean, I got to 140 and then 145 and 150, and I didn't lose it again, which, as you can imagine, for a 6'1" individual, 130 pounds, you're not going to have much energy, at that stage, no matter what the insides of your bones, your organs, your livers and kidneys, which I still have significant issues with. But anyways, health returned. And looking back, we talk about this moment, right? This shift that happened in my life with the comment of raising chickens. And don't get me wrong, I don't think 100 chickens is going to save anybody's life, right? That's not the point of the story. It's the difference between active and passive health. For the last 5 years, I have been seeking for somebody to give me the answer to my issues. And don't get me wrong, Western medicine, even Eastern medicine, has a great role to play in giving those fixes to a lot of people's health. In my context, in my story, what was missing was me becoming active to my place, actually seeking health and grabbing it, taking, the horse by the reins, or whatever analogy fits, and grabbing it, right? It's actually becoming an owner of our lives and being connected to place, forming a relationship with that place to find abundance. And that abundance was my health. And over another period of time, another epoch of my life, we raised chickens. My wife and I started a commercial market garden type veggie CSA operation, found out that we're horrible gardeners. We hate picking weeds. And so we raised more chickens, and then fell in love with the local cattle farm. They raised about 250 head of Irish Dexters, true mentors in our lives. The owner of the farm is my godfather, and he just ushered us in, somebody who didn't know much about farming or cattle management or animal husbandry at all, onto his wonderful farm, who could barely work more than an hour, without collapsing. And he ushered us in, and he taught us everything he knew. And it was absolutely, truly a magical experience. But it inoculated Morgan and I with a love of larger ruminants, cattle and even sheep, even goats. But just, we got out of that poultry game, and we found that our true genius, the true context of our lives, was working with cattle and sheep and pigs, larger scale, not just chickens in the backyard on 30 acres. And so we started to look for land, and my dad wanted to retire. And so dad retired, and I bought the farm, and we co-owned it. And now we're in Central Virginia on these 400 acres, farming full time. So that's the story, a little bit of the backstory.
Wow, what a story. And how long ago did when were you sitting on that porch reading the book and your mum came out? Because it's almost there's another book there. I was saved by a chicken.
I know. I was saved by a chicken. Well, I do have the book. I haven't written it yet, but the title is Farming for My Life. I don't know if that title will stay. I had a good friend. So something I haven't said. So my wife and I run this farm. We call it the Wildland. And we also run a hub with the Savory Institute. And so there's two different sides of our lives. We're farmers in some sense, and then educators, consultants, and trainers for Savory and their wonderful work. Well, anyways, there's another Savory hub out of Vermont that was talking to me about this book, and he goes, Daniel, I'm not encouraging you or discouraging you from writing this book. This book about your story, and 100 chickens saved my life. And he said, he looked at me and he said, or questioned, he's like, is it over yet? Is your story over yet? And I sat back and I thought, maybe not. Maybe there's still some story there that needs to develop before the story is fully written. But it'll be a book in the future, that's for sure.
I think it's before we get to the book, I think it's what a story, and to think about cause and symptoms and the way we treat health, and I guess the whole world has experienced if they haven't been affected by COVID physically, they've definitely been affected mentally. Their business has been affected, their life's been affected right around the world, and the number of people that are, I guess, seeing that they need to have some connection with the land, some connection with whether it is running a few chickens in their backyard or leaving the city and finding a small farm is certainly huge here in Australia, and I know it's huge in America. People are just getting out and realizing that they need to reconnect. It's certainly a time, and when we think about what that nurse said to you, this
too shall pass. Yeah.
That's what a line and something to think about when we're talking about agriculture and I guess degradation around the world and so forth. Is it shall pass. I mean, I've often said, well, people talk about the planet's going to be ruined. The planet's not going to be ruined. It's just humans. The planet will get rid of humans, and then it'll be fine.
Yeah. I believe. I think that the story has had many impacts in our lives. Physically, right? I'm not in some software tech firm in Silicon Valley, California. I'm in Central Virginia, in the middle of nowhere, an hour away from anybody. Farming and what a different world. So it's had some physical ramifications, but a lot of them are more philosophical, at least to us. I think back to this moment, and after writing this book, I'm calling this a virtual book tour. We've been talking to a lot of people and have been asked about our story, and we've really had to spend some time. My wife and I, Morgan and I have had to sit back and really look within ourselves and look at the story and really analyze it, because we've had to talk about it so much. And we're starting to notice that a lot of our life, the context that we have today in our professional lives, in our personal lives, in our relationships that we've cultivated, with our children, with each other, with our community, with our neighbors, with our farm customers, if you will, it's all built around the framework, the paradigm, the central foundations of this story. And to highlight a few of them, maybe for further thought, as you're going to bed, you can think about these things. But one when my mom came out of that back door, I'll never forget. There's moments of the story that I can go back to at any point in time and see it perfectly. There was a tear on her face and a smirk in her mouth, right? Pain and joy, right? Death and grief and life again. The regenerative movement, if it's built on anything, it's built on the idea that there's a cycle in life, right? That what is born, it grows, it lives, it flourishes, and then it dies, and then it's reborn. And that death to rebirth is that pain to joy to grief, death, the rebirth. There's all of that in there, right? In the complex coagulation that is life, all of these things operate in symbiosis, but they all have a period, right? If you're trying to kickstart a pasture regeneration by letting it be and taking all the herbivores, all the prey species out, all of that impact away, and not allow the death to occur, what does it look like, right? In this area of the world, understanding where we sit at this brittleness scale, right? That looks like more death. Right? The land is going to slowly grow, slowly oxidize, slowly degenerate. And only then, after it has fallen back to the earth, does the regeneration reoccur. But entering the animals that cause mass death into the grassland, out of that death, rebirth can occur much faster and much more holistically. Right? That is how the grassland and the herbivore have evolved and adapted for many thousands of years. And in that way, it is very holistic. That's what I mean by that. Well, the point is that death, grief, life, rebirth, pain, and joy, they all operate in this symphony, right? That is rhythmic, it's beautiful, and it's purposeful. And out of this purpose, we can harvest life abundance. That's one little side note. Another side note is the way we farm is crazy. You know, most people, even in this area of the world, think that Timshel Wildland is a crazy place with a bunch of nutcakes that are trying to ruin the domesticated genes of livestock, and we're totally fine with invasive species, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of really fun tangents we can dive into from a actual scientific or botany or ecology sort of way. But the point is that the way we farm is out of this deep pain. When you've been at the bottom and you've found health and you worked your way up the ladder in terms of gaining that health back, when you've actually summited that mountain, climbed that tree, and you can again see, right, the sunrise or the sunset, depending on which one you prefer, you see life in a different way. Going from the bottom to the top, it really impacts you. And we're not interested in, you know, raising animals this way. We're very interested in raising animals another way. And so we build our lives off of that. And tons of different takeaways, but the point is, stories are the foundation of our lives, and not just our lives, all life's lives. Stories matter, right? And so when I sat down and I wanted to write a book in regenerative ag, it's what we spend our life in, and I like writing, and so it just made a lot of sense. The book is built around stories, the stories that surround us, the stories that make us, if you will. And maybe those two things are actually the same thing. So yeah, it's an interesting story for sure.
And it's I think there was a couple of points you touched on there. You know, it's interesting you didn't go to Silicon Valley, but I interviewed Donna Gamarkigard, and she sells her meat right there in Silicon Valley, and guess who buys her grass-fed meat because he wants to seek the best product, Mark.
Yeah.
And I read an article where he said he won't eat meat unless he's, he likes to go to South Dakota to the ranch and help prepare that. And so, even people right around the world, doesn't matter where they are on the scale, are recognizing that. But by the same token, we, probably since the World War II, we've seen agriculture go down a path of trying to control everything. Where even we don't let the grasslands manage themselves because we fence the animals in until they starve if we don't manage that. We modify food to fit what we think we want. Take the simple apple. We've got some friends with a farm here who just out in their field is an apple tree that has been there forever. Anyway, we looked it up, and it's an apple that it's called the Pippin Apple, and it started in the US from seed, and it's So it's very, very old heritage variety. And we picked those apples, and you know, when you dry apples, if you don't put them in some juice, they go brown. Guess what? These apples don't go brown. Guess what? These apples aren't sugary. There was so much different about this heritage apple that it was almost like the apple you buy today, they're not even related. And so I guess the analogy of that is agriculture's been taken down that path, and we've lost that connection to what nature's trying to tell us. Like I've dropped the word weed in my terminology. It's just a plant, and that plant is the right plant at the right time. I think the other thing you touched on there is a lot of people are struggling with what's the definition of regenerative agriculture. And to me, it's pretty simple. If we're not regenerating, we're degenerating. You choose. And every individual, when you give them that choice, they don't want to degenerate. But then it's not just about the soil. It's about, well, your story is a classic. It's about regenerating ourselves. It's about that connection. It's about regenerating, you know, our community, our bank account, everything about our lives, a bit like the holistic context. And I think that's something that is, you know, you've really touched on in your story.
Yeah, no, there's so many tangents. One, Daniga, wonderful, wonderful woman and an amazing farmer. If you from that area, San Francisco Bay Area, truly the best grass-fed, grass-finished beef, in my opinion, around. Wonderful, wonderful. I think what you're saying about control is really on point. In fact, I agree with you completely, to be clear. But I take it a step further in the book. Today, agriculture, right, especially regenerative agriculture, right, we're pushing to sequester more carbon. We're pushing to build more soil, right, and we're trying to take everything we have and maximize the productive capacity of it, because in many ways it's very true. It's needed. We need less carbon in the atmosphere. We need more organic matter in our soils, and we need more production for smallholder farmers. And I would include myself as 400-acre farm. You know, as a quasi-smallholder farmer, we need more production to get more revenue to keep farmers farming, right? In the United States, and I don't know how it is in Australia, but a lot of smallholder producers are going out of business because they can't live on $20,000, $30,000, dollars a year in terms of total revenue. It's not a financially feasible model. And so we're pushing for all of those things for a good reason. But in the book, I question some of this, right? If in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, industrial agriculture, commoditized agriculture, emerged in the United States to produce more corn on less land with, inputs, blah, 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 to produce more food, is 2020 any different? So 1920, we were pushing for more corn on less acreage. 2020, we're pushing on more carbon in the same amount of acreage. I mean, it's the same narrative, right? Instead of corn, we're now talking about carbon. And what you're saying about is the regeneration of the self, the soul, the community, the relationships with all of the natural world, not just corn, not just carbon, but cows, and the relationships between the cows, and the relationships between the cows and the crown beard. Crown beard, again, being a native flowering weed, and weed is in parentheses. There's a whole chapter in the book, I don't know if you've gotten to it, called To Be a Weed. And the whole chapter is built to really argue very subtly, and in the form of a story, that there's no difference between weeds and flowers. It's just when we perceive them, right? It's just context. It's a beautiful chapter. It's one of my favorites in the book. But the point is, it's a relationship with all life. And so in the book, I'm not seeking to define what regenerative ag or regeneration is, but I do simplify it down and say, for us, in our understanding, regeneration is relationship. that's where it is. That's where it begins. It's about building a relationship with yourself, your community, with the natural world, and building communities around that relationship that are reciprocal, that have reciprocity, that see abundance as the foundation of the thing and the harvest as the product, right? You might not be able to harvest that which is abundant, right? But if you have abundance, I guarantee the harvest will also share in the abundance, right? It's a reframing of our understanding of farming, if you will. And regenerative agriculture, I think, is absolutely, in place to save the world. I don't think that's too big of a statement. You see it in, modern newspapers. It's emerging there. We're seeing this in the New York Times, these headlines, think to, Gabe Brown and others doing what they're doing at such a scale. But I think it can only really save the world if we allow it to save ourselves first, right? It starts at the soul and commences to the soil. We start inward and we work outward, the soul to the soil. It is how we perceive it. At least that's what the book's about.
And so let's talk a little bit about the book and what, I guess, what got you excited to write the book and some of the key points that you cover in the book.
Yeah, good question. Oh, let's see. So why did I write the book? What was the creative process? Maybe that's a good place to start. My wife and I, we have 3 children, 3 and under. It's a crazy, crazy household. Our youngest was born on November 2nd, 2020. So she's just a couple months old now. But for those of us who have kids and have been able to share those first couple weeks with the newborn, it's a magical time in especially a father's life, right? Like, I haven't been carrying this child in my womb for 9 months. I've never been able to talk to it or feel or feed it, right? It's now, realized, at least to the father. And I've just, first couple weeks have always just been mesmerizing and magical for me. Well, anyways, we named her Sequoia, in part after the tree, the redwood tree, Sequoia. But really foundationally, we named her after a Cherokee, a Native American chief from like the Georgia, South Carolina region of the Cherokee people. The story goes, and I'm going to give you a very high level because there's some intricacies that could take us some time and bear the conversation down. But in the middle of the 1800s, the 19th century, the wonderful Andrew Jackson, the president of the United States, decided that corn and cotton grow really well in South Carolina, Georgia, Atlanta. But that land was occupied by a lot of Cherokee, tribes and people groups. So long story short, we pack them up, we move them west. I'm not going to dive too much into those particulars. But for the first time in the long span of the Cherokee people, which we understand as many thousands, all the way up to about 10,000 years ago, the Cherokee people have understood themselves as the Cherokee people. They've gathered, they've organized, they've created communities under this name. They had never ever written down their language. It was a spoken language, a dialect of Algonquin, but a spoken language. It didn't have a syllabary, didn't have a dictionary, if you will. Well, for the first time after the Trail of Tears, as this epoch of American history has so been called, the Cherokee people, some still lived in their homeland, southeastern United States. Others had forcibly migrated to the west. But great distance separated the Cherokee people for the first time in thousands of years. And an actual distance, not just physical, but spiritual, emotional, relational, familial distance separated them. They couldn't communicate with each other. And so one of the indigenous chiefs, a guy named Sequoia, a brilliant individual, actually he took a moment I think in the 1830s or 40s, he took a moment to document, and he created what is now known today as the Cherokee Syllabary. He created a written language, their dialect of Algonquin, the same language that they spoke, to then communicate with his Cherokee family, right? And so anyways, I'm looking at our daughter who's named after this wonderful, brilliant man, Sequoia, and then therefore the tree, and her name is spelled like the tree because it's more feminine. But the first couple of weeks I'm holding this little baby girl, and this thought occurs to me that language is the solvent for community dysfunction, and I'll say that again, language is the solvent for community dysfunction. That if we have a dysfunctional community, this story, if we understand it correctly, says that language is the first place to start. Language, right? This is powerful. Language is something that's very easy. Documenting and creating a dialect of Algonquin from being a spoken language to a written language, that's very complex. That's very hard. But solving community function in the modern 21st century, right, by talking about language, this is something much easier. And so I had this thought, and I looked at my wife, Morgan, and I said, Morgan, I got to write this. Like this is my entrance into writing for regenerative ag. I'm not really interested in writing a how-to farm book. I think those are very needed, but I would do very poorly at it. That's not my style. And I think there's many other authors that are doing it really well, like Gabe Brown, the book right behind you, Dirt to Soil. I think it's a brilliant book. But my context into the world of books is more poetic. It's more storytelling. It's more like Wendell Berry, Aldo Leopold, and those, Walt Whitman, less like the brilliant Gabe Brown. And so I said, Morgan, I got to write this book, language being the solvent to community dysfunction. And as I said earlier in this call, we're my wife and I operate the Robinia Institute, which is our, regional hub of the Savory Institute. And in November 2020 into December, we were teaching way too many courses, traveling all over the East Coast, doing farm designs and land transition projects, all of that more savory related parts of our life. And my wife looked at me, she said, Daniel, you don't have time to write a book. No way do you have time to write a book with 2 kids and now a newborn, which makes it 3 kids, traveling all over the East Coast of the United States, teaching 3 or 4 different classes. And consulting and speaking and doing other things. You don't have time to write a book. And I said, well, I got to write it. I have this idea. I think it's brilliant. I don't know if I'm going to be brilliant or brilliant enough to actually do justice to the thing, but the idea I think is really important. It could shatter some lives in a very positive way, or I should say it can de-shatter or rebuild after the shattering of lives, especially during COVID. Well, anyways, I said, listen, I'm going to sit down for 2 or 3 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 weeks straight, and I'm going to write for 3 hours. That's it. For 3 weeks, 7 days a week, I'm just going to write. And whatever comes out of it is going to come out of it. Maybe it's a series of articles that we put on our website. Maybe it's the start of a book. Maybe it is a book, but it's going to be emergent. We're going to sit down. We're going to empty our hearts, pour our souls into a Word document, hit save, and after 3 weeks, that's going to be it. And so I can tell, I got the book right here, but this entire book, Wild Like Flowers, all 160 or 70 pages of it, were written in 3 weeks. I sat down, no roadmap, no understanding of the context of the book. All I had was the idea that language is a solvent to community dysfunction, and this is what came about it. So we wrote it in 3 weeks, hit save, sent it off to the editor, and then it launched, a couple months later after a pre-order process. And so that's our story, right? That's the reason this book was written. It's the understanding that language is really important. And as we talk about language, and I'll let you guys read the book to get more examples, but you see that I really challenge language, and I even create some language of my own, all within the context, the molding, the boundary of regenerative ag. It's written for regenerative ag, consumers, producers, organizations, whatever it is. It's written to that context, if you will. But for instance, do humans have a right to property? This is something that, the American constitutional system, the constitutional republic that we hold so dear, has created so well, that we have a right to property. I think this is very true. James Madison, author of the Constitution, President of the United States, he said the most sacred right of all property is the right to conscience, meaning to believe, to think what we will. This is absolutely true. But this is not what I'm talking about. Going back to the idea of control, I think a lot of people, especially Americans, have taken those ideas, those foundational tenets, those mores of the American constitutional regime, and extended it into the world of farming, of agriculture. And I don't know if they transition well there. I'm not saying people can't own land. I own land, and I think it's a very fine thing. But what I'm saying is we can't control land. Just because I have a right to this tree doesn't mean that I can do whatever I want to that tree for any reason at any time without care to the tree, the thing that is that tree, right? I can own it in a very public sense, in a political sense. but I don't own that tree, not in a soul sense, in a relationship sense, in a community sense. And so we challenge that. We say we don't have a right to relationship, or I'm sorry, I just ruined it, but we don't have a right to property. We have a right to have relationship with the thing. That is the defining characteristic of all living beings. We have a right to relate with one another. And in that relationship, we can find property, we can find abundance, we can find harvest. I'm not saying don't harvest the tree. We just harvested a beautiful 80-foot tall, gorgeous 36-inch diameter white oak from the forest. And we're building these glamping sites on the property to bring people to the farm. We're building compost toilets and outdoor showers that are solar heated. We're doing all of this with this lumber. I'm not saying don't fall the tree, right? Although Leopold has this great quote. He says the conservationist is not somebody who doesn't bring an axe into the wood. It's somebody who brings an axe into the woods, but considers his actions at every step. That's a paraphrase. It's not an exact quote. The exact quote is beautiful and poetic. But the point is conservationism, right? The right to relationship is a mentality. It starts at the soul and then proceeds to the soil. So that's one way we discuss language in the book, right to relationship and reciprocity, community, abundance, community healing, rural regeneration, bringing people back to the rural centers of the United States where they can thrive. Right now, it's the opposite. People are leaving these rural areas to urban city type environments because there's no money here. There's no life to be had, right? And so I'm talking very holistically. I'm talking about regenerating, soil sequestering, carbon, building biodiversity and species habitat. And I'm also talking about reinvigorating the rural environment financially, communally, right? Bringing young people back to the middle of nowhere, not because they like being hermits, but because they like the community that is the middle of nowhere. But we have to have the community first. So a lot of things I'm throwing out. Maybe there's one there that you want to, jump on, and we can dive down that tangent.
Well, I think it's interesting the way you share that and the way you language it. Where I often say to people, you can't own land because you're not going to. It's going to own you eventually, but we're the caretakers. We're the caretakers of that land for future generations. That's all we are. And
yes.
And so I really love, language. Language is really that solvent for the community discussion, and it's, I think it's interesting. Social media is interesting, and it's funny that our Prime Minister had a headline this morning that said social media is the work of the devil, and I'm like, well, no. Social media actually, for me, is actually how whatever I've met you. It's just a medium. It's not, and then people can either, go into a degenerating discussion or a regenerating discussion, and that I love social media because you can just block those people out that want to degenerate life and not take that community another way. It's just and then what it's done is create the opportunity for us to have a bigger community to talk about coming back to our own community. And I think, it's the same here in Australia. We've seen rural communities decline, young people go to the cities, small communities, after we relied a lot on overseas travellers, backpackers, and for labour in rural Australia. And of course, with COVID, they're not here. And so there's a real lack of people, the real demand for labour in rural communities here. Well, that creates an opportunity. It's not a bad thing. And, I say to people in agriculture, they go, oh, it's hard to get an employee. Well, great. Let's get some kids and train them. And if we give those, if you, just like you got started on chickens and look where that's led you to, every young person, if we could give them all that opportunity, then boy, where could we go with this conversation?
Yeah, it would be powerful. I like that, the choice. You're talking about a choice here, right? It's the choice to regenerate, the choice to degenerate. You said that earlier with what is regeneration. It's the opposite of degeneration, and you have the choice. There's a really interesting part of the book. Again, I'm talking about language. The modern English word cultivation. So that's the framework of this conversation, cultivation. It's an interesting word because when you step back into the initial root, which is Latin, it's cultivo, which literally, it's a verb. It literally means to till, to toil, or to turn over. And I would say a lot of commercial, definitely in the Western world, commercial agriculture is to cultivate, to till, to toil, to turn over, is to control. And this isn't a till versus no-till conversation, but the idea is it's to control. This verb cultivo, the Latin root of cultivation is to control. But it's interesting, there's still a choice here, right? It's not all doom and gloom. There's a cognate. The Greek cognate to cultivo is pelo, P-E-L-O, pelo. It's what the Latin word cultivo is built on, and it's what the word, English modern word cultivation is built on. But pelo is the original Greek word for our modern word cultivation, and it doesn't mean what the Latin word means. It actually means to be or to become. I'm saying this and I got chills going down my back. To be a farmer, to cultivate, right, it is the choice to become, right? Just like that original poem that I shared at the beginning. The buffalo, they stand in a circle, I join with them, right? Cultivation, farming is not about control, and it's not about, cover crops and no-till drills, right? These are tools, right? Holistic management is a tool, right? Cattle in many ways, not perfectly, but cattle in many ways are tools, right? That's not regeneration itself, right? To regenerate, to cultivate is to be or to become. That word to be was the original name of this book. When I started writing that's really what I was writing for. Regenerative agriculture to work has to focus on being, not doing. The doing will come, right? We're good at doing. The human species has been good at doing since we've been the human species. But let's stop for the moment and consider, to question, to ponder, to write poetry instead of to drive tractors for the moment, right? And focus on being the natural world, being abundance. Let's focus on joining with the buffalo as they stand in a circle, right? Let's focus on being with them. And out of that being, that relationship, that community, abundance will occur. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes it's not the abundance that we're pushing for. For instance, there's areas of our pasture that by doing this sort of philosophical animal husbandry, this holistic management writ in a very wild perspective, I don't like what's happening, right? Poison hemlock is coming up on the fringes as a very poisonous plant, what killed Socrates, if you're a fan of Greek history. Very poisonous. Cattle don't touch it, nothing touches it, but it's doing something, and I trust that. It's emerging here and not there to do something. I'm letting that do what it needs to do, and I don't question it. I'm not going to go out there with a full body, rubberized bodysuit and start pulling up this very, poisonous weed. It's there for a reason. And so the point is, abundance isn't always positive from a human, mechanized, reductionist, linear commoditization of the natural world sense. No, abundance is natural ecosystem succession. It's resilience, it's diversity in motion, or it's uniform diversity, meaning that uniformly across the landscape, there is diversity. But in order for that to be the case, there has to be some plants that our cows like and some plants that our cows don't like. Right, going back to, is a weed a flower, or is a flower a weed, or is there any difference? It's the redefinition of abundance is what I'm really trying to get at.
Poison hemlock, I had a big patch of that, quite a patch of that by the river, and it was so high and so thick you couldn't walk through it really. But if you go there now 6 months later, the cattle, I don't know whether they ate it, but they certainly not. It's not there. They've knocked it down. It's just flat, gone. And whether they I don't know whether they ate it, they didn't eat it, whatever happened, it sorted itself out. Same with thistles. And it's this has been going on for a long time now. I don't know whether you've read the book Against the Grain by James C. Scott. But that book talks
I
about
have. Yep.
10,000 years ago. Like, isn't that fascinating? We drained, we drained the swamps and flooded the deserts, and you know, they brought that into place so they could control the people. And I loved how he explained, you know, that the state wanted to control the people. So how do we control the people? We grow crops, because that allows the tax man to come at a certain time and control.
Right.
And the people that wouldn't conform,
there's control over the growing calendar.
Yeah. And the people that wouldn't conform, they were barbarians. And I put my hand up. I'm a barbarian. I do not want to conform.
Yeah. No, right there with you. Well, all of my good friends, they always joke with me that my favorite word is emergent abundance, and there's no space. It's just emergent abundance, because I use it in almost every conversation I ever have in this regard. But it really is what we're pushing for. When you release control, when you relinquish that which you understand to be the only salvation to civilized society, control, right? What you find is a society that's amazingly civilized, but amazingly abundant. But it's an emergent abundance, right? I said you have to redefine what abundance really is. Emergence, right, is 2 + 2 equaling not 4. It's not something you can mathematically plan. It's not, there's not an input and an output where a function takes that input and perfectly manipulates it to have a perfectly replicable output, right? It's poison hemlock on creek banks, or mines on the side of this, call it a hill, not a mountain that we live on. We live in Appalachia, not the Rocky Mountains or anywhere else. People always joke with us, these aren't mountains, these are hills, but it feels like a mountain we live on. So poison hemlock is growing in two different regions, right? Yours very wet, mine's very dry, but it's emerging, right? And the abundance that is occurring is an emergent abundance. And so there is that. You went in redefining abundance, and maybe this is what I'm trying to say. In redefining abundance, you have to redefine what harvest looks like. You have to redefine the presuppositional assumptions that you came into agriculture with, right? That you take one kernel of grain, let's call it, grass, I guess I should say, because I was using corn as an example, one kernel of corn, and you stick it in the ground and you cultivate it and you water it. And first you have to till it, right? And then the weeds start to grow. And so you spray the weeds and you allow it to grow, and out comes the stalk, right, of corn. But I planted corn and I got corn. That's not emergent abundance. That's just a harvest. Whether or not it has abundance attached is another conversation for another day. But the point is, when you release control, and then you have to redefine abundance, you have to also redefine what harvest could mean. Because that harvest could mean that instead of having, poison hemlock in one side of a pasture, let's say, just say a riverbank, instead of there being lush, riparian vegetation for your cattle to drink or to eat, during a summer drought, you have poison hemlock, right, which grows in exclusion. The cows don't eat it, they don't touch it. But it's doing something there. It might not be doing something for the cattle today, but it's doing something. It's healing something. It's providing a solvent to a niche not yet filled. It's bringing up minerals. It's doing something that we as humans don't understand. Maybe it's acting within the mycorrhizal food web and underneath the soil surface, communicating with trees or other plants, or maybe it's more of a medicinal plant for other plants that are suffering from some disease or pest that we as in Western science has yet to understand. It's doing something, right? And then therefore it's abundant, right? It's resilience, it's diversity. And when we use these words, we have to redefine what abundance means and what harvest means, therefore. Maybe that's gibberish.
I think you're spot on. I'm right there with you. I mean, as I said, I don't call any plant I don't use the word weed anymore. It's just a plant doing its job, and I have no idea what its job is, but it knows what its job is, and
that's good enough.
That's all we need to know. It'll evolve.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we see industrial agriculture, I suppose, talk about we need to do all these things to feed the world. And I remember being with Gail Fuller in Kansas, where he said Kansas has the ability to grow enough food to feed 15% of the world's population, yet they import 90% of their food. so we've you know, we've gone down this path of well, can't even call the stuff that they sell in those supermarkets food, I guess. It's not even food. The stuff that's processed and put out. But you know, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Australia or even Africa, where communities really took responsibility for their own food, and I guess that's the conversation Gail Fuller has, you know, is we can actually supply all the food we need for our local community, within our local community, or even for ourselves. And I think that's exciting. What's exciting is that here in Australia there's a group called Diggers who sells heritage vegetable fruit seeds, and we got a letter the other day they said we have sold 4 times more than we've ever done. We just keep having to put staff on. We cannot keep up, and we've had to stop online orders at times because we just cannot supply the product. The demand for people to grow things in their own backyard, become more self-sufficient, is just so exciting. And you know, there's so many positives to come out of a pandemic going around the world.
Yeah. When you were talking, it reminded me of this, and I was digging through the book because I want to make sure I got it right, because it's taken from the United States Department of Agriculture. But 40% of the corn grown in the United States is turned into diesel, so ethanol, and 36% is fed to livestock. So 40 is diesel, 36% is livestock, right? And it always gets me, and by the way, I'm not going to challenge either of these two things, and in the book I don't challenge it, right? This is not a conversation of grass finish between grain finished or whether or not you should have tractors that consume diesel. That's not the point. Well, the point of this conversation, and I think what you're trying to get at, or at least what we're trying to get at in this conversation, it going back to the choice, is the conversation about using commercialized agriculture, right? Commoditizing nature to feed the world. It just, that argument doesn't work anymore, right? 76% total, right, of all corn produced in the United States, according to the United States Department of Agriculture in a 2017 study, it doesn't even feed humans, right? And don't get me wrong, feeding cows is then going to feed humans because we're the ones that eat it. But the point is, do cows need it, right? Can we grow the same amount of nutrition, not beef, not calories, but nutrition in a different way? 74% of corn is misallocated. In some ways, we need diesel, right? We grow corn to produce diesel to then feed tractors to then plant more corn. So it's a self-defeating, self-feeding irony that's really problematic, right? And the idea is not to challenge the paradigms, and this is my opinion, my belief. The idea is not to challenge the paradigms of commercialized ag, right? I don't think that commercial ag exists because they thought herbicides and Roundup and Paraquat were good things, right? I have a neighbor we were talking the other day, I think she's about 80 years old. Her mother died when she was 53 years old. Many years ago. She was 53 years old, and this lady is our neighbor, wonderful, wonderful woman, thinks that she was poisoned by glyphosate. She thinks that she did die of glyphosate poisoning of that era of commercialized industry. It's real, it's tangible, it's here, it's present. Commercial ag. It's not just, not just lacking financial stability. It's not just not producing food for humanity like we wanted it to. I mean, but it's a very painful reality. But I don't think any of this was created for the death of human society. I don't think any of it is some massive plot to kill the world or to institute a new world regime. I don't think any of that is true. I think there was a hungry people after decades of the largest wars this world has ever seen, 10 through 1940s. And they saw agriculture as a need, a serious need. We need to produce more food more accessibly for the people dying on the front lines. We have these needs, right? And out of these needs, they found a solution. But now, sitting as we are in the 21st century, plagued with issues, ailments, diseases, sicknesses, right, that are in many ways caused by the solvents of those initial needs, we have to step back. Not to cast blame, right? Not to say that they chose the wrong ways. My grandfather was too stupid to understand that spraying poison on a cornfield is going to kill the people who ate the corn, right? They didn't think this way. Not at least that I understand. And so instead of casting blame, what we have to do is cast a choice, right? Like you said in the very, very beginning of this, do we degenerate or do we regenerate? Do we take the understanding that we have of science, of life, of biology, of zoology, of botany, of ecology, like all of this stuff, right? And take it out of science, right? Pick up Masanobu Fukuoka's One Straw Revolution and dive into the poetic philosophy of regenerative ag itself, or pick up Bill Mollison's work and throw the science aside and see the rhetoric, the rich philosophy, the poetry that he's pushing forth, right? Take the science, take Masanobu and Bill Mollison and Wendell Berry and Otto Leopold. Maybe one day Wild Like Flowers would be in that list. I doubt it. Not that good. Otto Leopold and Wendell Berry are amazing. And let's co-create a much more abundant future, right? That's what we're focused on. Let's take what we have and co-create a more abundant future by not casting blame, but by seeing it as a choice to cultivate community, i.e. palo, the original Greek for cultivate, palo, to become. Let's become community. Let's form relationships with each other, with the soil, with the natural world, and let's co-create a much more abundant and beautiful world.
Wow. I'm just blown away with it, with our chat here, and Wild Like Flowers is you only have to start one person, influence one person, and it can become a movement. And I think that the couple of takeaways that I take away from this is it's all about the language. But I think letting go, I guess that was part of your healing. Was the chickens was part of letting go, letting life come in and regenerate you, not trying to, and that's farming. I think that's the great thing about farming is we cannot manipulate nature. The sooner people realize that, the sooner they have so much more choice and power. And I think letting go, but I think that word choice. I often hear people say, I have to do this because I've got no choice. Well, no, we have a choice. We can choose every day the attitude we're going to embrace for that day. And what our attitude is going to influence everything in our lives. I teach low stress stock handling, and our creed is attitude is everything. My attitude when I go and interface with those animals is going to determine whether those animals have a good day or a bad day. If I'm working with other people, my attitude is going to determine whether we have a good day or a bad day. And so we have a choice in every moment. And if we keep choosing and letting go and choosing and letting go and letting nature into our lives and listening to nature, that's what I loved about Wolf Girl with Donegal, her ability to observe nature. How amazing. We often go out to the farm and we'll just sit there, maybe we're having a coffee break or something, and listen to the birds. And we often just, how many species of birds? There's that bird. They're just observing what's happening out there in life. And then we fly fish. And so when you're a fly fisher, guess what? You're observing the minutest little insects and hatches. And so you really realize that there's things you can't see that are life, and then you see those little things, and then they grow into big things, and then right through to our cattle. But all of that is all of life. So Daniel, as we sum up, I suppose, what's your parting message for everybody today?
Well, I'll tag on to what you just said. This goes back to low stress, stock management or handling. The book has 2 chapters in it about basically what you're saying. Low stress stockmanship is about, calming the self and approaching a situation with a choice already made, right? And that animals, life all around you, including humans, can feel this, right? And that feeling is going to emanate, and then it's going to inoculate that community, right? So somebody walking into a conversation that's tense, that tenseness is going to inoculate the substrate, the community, with tenseness, right? Well, anyways, there's 2 chapters in the book where I really question, can you push animals, or do they have to be led? And I say this, can abundance occur by pushing animals, or can it only happen by leading animals? And so in the last chapter of the book, I try to answer the question. I'm trying to load this bull. We're pushing him. We're working the corral. We got the herd here, hundreds of cows on this side, 1 bull on this side. We're trying to give him a trailer, and he's not budging. He's not going. And it's this wonderfully beautiful chapter where I start to wonder, like, what are the birds thinking, right? Of these mammals running around on 2 or 4 legs pushing each other and yelling and screaming. And there's that funny meme that says, if you ever want to divorce your wife, just move cattle with her. Or if you ever want your wife to divorce you, just move. Like, there's a lot of stress there if you let it happen, right? I'm not saying you're supposed to let it happen, but if you do let it happen, there's a lot of stress. And the birds that fly from this to that, right? That are nourished by the fly. I mean, it's just, they look down at us and they wonder, what are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? Well, anyways, it's at this point in the book, and this is an answer to your question. I postulate this and I say, what if moving animals, especially cattle, was as difficult as just kneeling down in front of them and saying, or asking, do you want to move? Move with me, follow me, right? Entering a place of humility to then lead them where they're going. And in that place of humility, and I'm not, I might be some long-haired Virginia hippity-dippity kind of guy, but I don't mean it, at least this context, this conversation, this question, from that sense. What I mean is humbling yourself enough to look a cow in the face and say, would you follow me? There's a recent video on our Instagram where we have a herd of about 100, 150 head of Irish texture cows and a couple odds and ends in there. And I dropped the wire, and I was supposed to bring them about a half a mile across the farm. No alleyway fences, no fences of any kind, some through woods, some through pastures. And I just take the phone like this, and I just held it behind me. And I called, and I whooped like I do, and I asked them to come follow me, and they just all walked right behind me, and they never got in front of me. It was like this weird little, this figurative leash, right, was put around them because they trusted me, right? And I pulled them like I would pull a dog. I led them, I should say, like I led a dog. And it doesn't always happen that way, right? Something wrong happens. There's a coyote in the wolf or a groundhog or something that just spooks them and turns into disarray. It's not always lollipops, giggles, and joy, but this time it was lollipops, giggles, and joy, right? It's the idea that to farm is not just to release control. To work with the abundance of the natural world is not just to redefine abundance. It's to be humble enough to stand in front of the herd, right? And to be calm and sedate and peaceful enough, right? To understand the poetry that is the thing itself and ask, would you follow me? And then get up on your feet and start walking and see if they follow you. That humility is enough to regenerate. I don't care what your stock density is. I don't care if you use polywire or polybraid. I don't care if you use management intensive grazing or holistic management, or if you follow Savory Institute holistic management or Holistic Management International's version. I don't care about any of those things. What I'm saying is kneel down in front of the lead cow, bull, whatever it is, and bring yourself to their level, because you are at their level. And anything else is just a misunderstanding of your place in this world. And say, from a humble perspective, would you follow me? And then get up and start walking. I don't know if that's helpful to some people. Maybe it's going to change some people's lives. Maybe they think I'm just some random Virginia farmer trying to get ran over by some cows, but it works here, and it has changed our lives.
Well, I think that's what we've done today. Is people are going to follow you. People are going to read your book and follow you and your journey. Where can people find out more about your book and you if they haven't got the book yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can buy the book anywhere you buy books online. It's on Walmart.com, Target, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, all those different places, depending on where you're listening from, from the world. Pick your appropriate medium. If you go to my personal site, DanielFirthGriffith.com, my full name, DanielFirthGriffith.com, you can buy the book directly from us. I'll sign it for you. I ship it from my house. It's more of a relationship thing that we want to have. And so it's the same price. It might come 2 or 3 days later. You'll pay the same in shipping as you do on Amazon, but I'll sign it and write a nice note to you. To learn more about the farm, the Wildland, what we're doing, you can go to wildtimshel.com. Wild Timshel. Timshel is Timshel. Wildtimshel.com. We're currently rebranding. We're about to launch in about a week or so, a whole new website with all sorts of resources and videos that we've been hard at work at during this previous winter. But wildtimshel.com is where it is today and where it will be much newer and improved in about a week or so. And stay up to date with us. We're also talking about social media and using it, or it being contextually relevant. We're also very active on social media. See a bunch of happy cows, happy pigs, happy farmers, emergent properties, and that are painful and some that are very joyful, but abundance either way. On our Instagram, you can just find us. I don't know our hashtag or handle or whatever people say these things are. You can just type in Timshel Wildland into the search, and you'll find us. So I appreciate the time, Grahame. I really, really enjoyed this coffee house talk, meet and greet. It was a pleasure for me. It's been really fun. I hope it's the same for you.
It's been an absolute joy to connect with you and discuss, not just the book, but your philosophies and to hear your backstory. What an amazing story. So thank you very much.